The evening air held a crisp chill as the last rays of sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and purple. The Metropolitan Hall stood like a glowing beacon against this backdrop, its windows ablaze with golden light. Tonight was the annual Autumn Gala, where the city's elite gathered to network, show off their latest fashion purchases, and pretend to care about the charity that would receive a fraction of what had been spent on the event itself. Elena Michaels adjusted her deep burgundy dress as she stepped out of her sleek black car. At 42, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her worth down to the penny, and that worth was considerable. As the CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, she had transformed a struggling startup into a billion-dollar company in just 8 years. Business magazines called her ruthless. Board members called her brilliant. Her employees called her the glacier behind her back, beautiful to behold but cold enough to cause frostbite. "Ms. Michaels, over here," a photographer called out, his camera already clicking rapidly. Elena gave him her practiced smile, lips curved just enough to suggest warmth without creating wrinkles, eyes focused slightly above the camera to avoid the harsh flash. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Lily, hovered nearby with a tablet. "Your schedule for the evening is set. The mayor wants 5 minutes at 8:30. The investors from Singapore will be at table 7. And Mr. Harrington specifically requested, I don't care what Thomas Harrington wants." Elena cut her off, taking a champagne flute from a passing server without acknowledging him. "He's after the same thing they all are." "The new distribution contract?" Lily asked, confused. Elena laughed, the sound like ice cubes tinkling in crystal. "No, Lily, my company. Or me. Usually both." She took a delicate sip of champagne. "Either way, he's not getting it." The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of old-world elegance with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and marble columns. Elena moved through the space like she owned it, nodding at acquaintances, accepting compliments on Pinnacle's latest quarter, deflecting questions about her personal life. By 9 o'clock, she had secured 2 potential partnerships, diplomatically rejected a merger proposal, and managed to avoid Thomas Harrington entirely. Success by any measure, yet she felt the familiar emptiness creeping in, the hollow feeling that always seemed to find her in crowds these days. Elena drifted toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, where a magnificent grand piano sat untouched. She ran her fingers lightly across its polished surface, remembering childhood lessons she had abandoned as soon as her parents stopped forcing her to practice. "Beautiful instrument, isn't it?" The voice belonged to Richard Donovan, chairman of her board. He approached with his usual entourage of yes-men, their expensive suits and forced laughter announcing their presence before they even spoke. "It is," Elena agreed, withdrawing her hand. "Though I imagine it's merely decorative tonight. Like so many things here," Richard said with a wink, gesturing vaguely at the crowd. More forced laughter from his followers. Elena suppressed an eye roll. Richard was in his 60s, divorced 3 times, and still behaved like he was God's gift to women. The conversation quickly turned to business. Projected earnings, potential acquisitions, the usual. Elena responded automatically while scanning the room, suddenly desperate for an escape. She spotted a service door open briefly as a member of the cleaning staff, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, slipped in quietly to empty a trash bin. He moved efficiently, almost invisibly, through the crowd of chattering guests. No one looked at him. No one thanked him. It was as if he existed in a parallel dimension that only occasionally intersected with theirs. Speaking of acquisitions, Richard was saying, "I hear Thomas Harrington has been quite persistent in his attentions toward you." Elena snapped her attention back to the conversation. "Thomas Harrington is persistent about everything. It's his least attractive quality among many unattractive qualities." "Oh, come now," chuckled one of Richard's followers, a balding man whose name Elena couldn't remember. "He's one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, successful, handsome, charismatic." "And boring," Elena finished. "I've had more interesting conversations with my GPS navigator." The men laughed uncomfortably, except for Richard, whose eyes narrowed slightly. "You know, Elena, you've rejected every suitable man in our circle. One might begin to wonder what exactly you're looking for." The question hit a nerve. though Elena would rather die than show it. What was she looking for? At 42, she had everything she'd ever worked for: professional success, financial security, respect, or at least fear from her peers. Yet something was missing, and she couldn't quite name it. "I'm looking for substance," she said finally, lifting her chin. "Someone with depth. Someone who can surprise me." "Substance doesn't keep you warm at night," Richard countered with another wink. Something inside Elena snapped. Perhaps it was the champagne or the suffocating smallness of the conversation, or the way these men looked at her, like she was another acquisition to be negotiated. "You want to know what I'm looking for?" Her voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "I'm looking for someone who sees more in life than just business deals and stock options. Someone with passion and talent." She gestured toward the piano. "I'd marry the first man who could sit at that piano and play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor flawlessly." A hush fell over the immediate vicinity. Elena hadn't realized how loudly she'd spoken until she saw the wide eyes of those around her. Even Lily, hovering nearby as always, looked shocked. "Chopin's Ballade?" someone murmured. "Isn't that incredibly difficult?" "One of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire," confirmed another guest, a woman in her 50s who taught at the city conservatory. Richard recovered first, his laugh booming across the sudden silence. "Well, there you have it, gentlemen. The key to Elena Michaels' heart is not diamonds or corporate mergers, but a dead Polish composer." The tension broke as people laughed, though many exchanged glances that clearly questioned Elena's seriousness. She maintained her cool smile, refusing to show any embarrassment. Let them think she was joking. Or better yet, let them think she had impossibly high standards. Either way, it would keep the Thomas Harringtons of the world at bay for a while longer. "If you'll excuse me," Elena said smoothly, "I need to speak with the mayor." As she walked away, she felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her intently. She glanced back but saw only the usual crowd, plus the maintenance worker, who was now wiping down a table with careful, practiced movements. For just a moment, their eyes met across the room. The man quickly looked down, resuming his work. Elena moved on, putting the odd moment out of her mind. She had a mayor to charm, investors to reassure, and a reputation to maintain. By tomorrow, everyone would forget her outburst about Chopin. Life would continue as it always had, perfectly controlled, perfectly predictable, perfectly empty. What Elena didn't know was that her words had landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples would soon return to change everything. The maintenance worker, whose name badge read Miguel, finished wiping the table and quietly slipped out through the service door. In the back hallway, away from the glittering crowd, he flexed his left hand, the one with the slightly crooked fingers and the long scar across the palm. Then, very softly, he began to hum the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece he knew by heart. Miguel Reyes closed the staff locker room door behind him and leaned against it, suddenly aware of how tired his body felt. The icy night shift at Metropolitan Hall always drained him, but tonight was different. Tonight, his mind raced while his fingers twitched at his sides, playing invisible keys to a melody he hadn't allowed himself to fully remember in years. He changed out of his gray uniform into worn jeans and a faded blue sweater, catching his reflection in the small, cloudy mirror above the sink. At 45, his once coal-black hair now showed generous streaks of silver, especially at the temples. Lines had formed around his eyes, from squinting, from smiling, from crying, from living. "You're being ridiculous," he told his reflection in a whisper. The words came out with the slight accent he'd never fully shaken despite his 15 years in America. But his mind kept returning to the woman in the burgundy dress, Elena Michaels. Everyone who worked at the hall knew who she was. The cleaning. Staff often whispered about her when she hosted events. How she never left a tip. How she spoke to servers without looking at them. How her rare smiles never reached her eyes. Yet there had been something in her voice when she'd made that outburst about Chopin. Something real beneath the polished exterior. Loneliness? Frustration? Whatever it was, It had reached across the crowded room and touched something inside him that he'd kept buried for too long. Miguel pulled his left hand up, studying it under the harsh fluorescent light. He flexed his fingers slowly, feeling the familiar tightness around the middle and ring fingers where the nerves had been damaged. The scar that ran diagonally across. His palm had faded to a pale line, but the memories attached to it remained as vivid as ever. "Stop this," he muttered to himself, shoving his hand into his pocket. He grabbed his worn backpack and headed out into the night. The bus stop was deserted at this hour. Miguel sat alone on the bench, the events of the evening playing on repeat in his mind. He hadn't touched a piano in 7 years. Not since that disastrous attempt at his cousin's wedding, when he'd tried to play a simple waltz and his injured hand had betrayed him, turning the music into a painful, disjointed mess. The pitying looks afterward had been worse than the physical pain. Before that night, he'd been Miguel Reyes, the promising young concert pianist from Santiago, trained at Chile's National Conservatory, with performances across South America, and a future bright with possibilities. After that night, and after the accident that caused it all, he became just Miguel, the quiet man who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes, pulling Miguel from his thoughts. He rode in silence through the sleeping city, watching the neighborhoods transform from the gleaming downtown towers to the modest apartment buildings of his area. By the time he climbed the 4 flights to his small apartment, the elevator had been broken for months. It was nearly 2 in the morning. He tried to enter quietly, but the door's stubborn hinges creaked loudly in the silence. Miguel winced, hoping the noise wouldn't. "Papa?" A sleepy voice called from the darkness of the living room. Too late. Miguel switched on the small lamp to find his 16-year-old daughter, Lucia, curled up on their second-hand couch with a textbook open across her lap. "You should be in bed, pequeña," he said softly. Lucia rubbed her eyes, her long dark hair falling in tangles around her face. "I was studying for my chemistry test. I tried to wait up." Miguel felt the familiar mixture of pride and concern that his daughter brought out in him. Lucia worked so hard at school, determined to be the first in their family to attend college. Sometimes he worried she pushed herself too much, trying to make up for what they didn't have. "Chemistry will still be there in the morning," he said, gently closing her textbook. "Sleep is important too." Lucia nodded, too tired to argue. As she gathered her things, she glanced at him curiously. "You look different, Papa. Did something happen at work?" Miguel hesitated. His daughter knew pieces of his past, that he had once been a pianist, that an accident had changed their lives, but he rarely spoke about it. The pain of lost dreams was something he had tried to shield her from. "Just a long night," he answered with a small smile. "Go to bed now." After Lucia had disappeared into the bedroom she shared with her younger brother Diego, Miguel moved quietly through their small apartment. Diego's soft snores came from behind the bedroom door. At 12, the boy could sleep through anything. In the kitchen, Miguel poured himself a glass of water and sat at the small table, his mind still unsettled. Beside the refrigerator stood a bookshelf filled with Lucia's schoolbooks, Diego's comics, and a few treasures Miguel had managed to bring from Chile. Almost without thinking, he reached for one of these, a worn leather binder filled with sheet music. He hadn't opened it in years, but his fingers found it instinctively, as if drawn by some invisible force. The pages were yellowed now, the notes fading in places but still legible. He turned carefully until he found what he was looking for, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The opening notes seemed to rise from the page, haunting and delicate. Miguel remembered how the piece built gradually, like a story unfolding before erupting into passionate, technically demanding passages that required absolute control and abandonment at the same time. It had once been his favorite piece to play before. His fingers moved reflexively, tracing the patterns on the tabletop. To his surprise, his left hand followed the complex movements without the usual stiffness. Perhaps it was the lateness of the hour, or perhaps something had awakened inside him that refused to be silenced again. An idea began to take shape in his mind, not fully formed yet, more like a whisper of possibility. He wasn't interested in the CEO's ridiculous marriage proposal, of course. The very thought made him smile ruefully. But maybe, just maybe, he could play again. Not for her, but for himself. For the part of him that had been silenced for too long. The next morning arrived too quickly. Miguel woke to Diego shaking his shoulder. "Papa, wake up!" Lucia says we're going to be late. Miguel blinked groggily, realizing he'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table, the sheet music still open before him. He'd dreamed of playing, his hands moving confidently across the keys while a woman in a burgundy dress watched in silence. The morning routine proceeded as usual: hurried breakfasts, last-minute homework checks, reminders about after-school plans. Miguel walked his children to the bus stop, then headed to his morning job at the cafe 6 blocks away. He worked there from 7 to 2, then had a few hours before his evening shift at Metropolitan Hall began at 5. Usually, he used those hours to rest or take care of errands. But today, after waving goodbye to Rosa, the cafe owner, he found himself walking in a different direction, toward St. Joseph's Church. The old stone building was quiet at this hour, with only a few elderly parishioners sitting in silent prayer. Miguel nodded respectfully to them as he made his way to the back of the church, where a modest piano sat in the corner, used for choir practice. Father Thomas had told him once that he was welcome to play it whenever the church was open. Miguel had thanked him but never taken up the offer, until today. He sat on the bench, the worn wooden surface smooth beneath him. For a long moment he simply stared at the keys, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it echoed in the quiet church. Then, slowly, he placed his hands in position and began to play. The first notes were tentative, his fingers stiff and unsure. But as the familiar melody of Chopin's ballade began to take shape, something remarkable happened. His hands remembered. His left hand, with its damaged nerves and painful memories, began to move with growing confidence, finding the complex patterns that had once been second nature. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled in places, and some of the more demanding passages remained beyond his current ability. But the music was there, emerging like a river that had been dammed too long, finally finding its way forward again. Miguel lost track of time as he played, starting over when he made mistakes, working through difficult sections again and again. He didn't notice the tears on his cheeks or the small audience that had gathered to listen. Father Thomas, an elderly couple, the church secretary. When he finally stopped, his hands aching but somehow lighter, Father Thomas approached with a gentle smile. "I didn't know you could play like that, Miguel," he said softly. It was beautiful. Miguel looked down at his hands, surprised to find them steady. "I didn't know I still could either," he admitted. As he left the church, checking his watch and realizing he needed to hurry to make it to Metropolitan Hall on time, Miguel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. The music had awakened something in him that refused to be put back to sleep. Tonight was the board meeting at Metropolitan Hall. Elena Michaels would be there. Miguel had no intention of playing for her or revealing his past. But knowing that he could play again, that this essential part of himself wasn't lost forever, filled him with a quiet determination. For the first time in years, Miguel Reyes walked with his head held high, the ghost of a melody following him through the busy streets. 2 days after the gala, Elena strode through the main entrance of Metropolitan Hall, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was running 15 minutes early for the quarterly board meeting, a deliberate choice that allowed her to review her presentation one final time in the empty boardroom before the others arrived. Her mind was focused entirely on the numbers she would present, the strategies she would outline, and the objections she would need to counter. The incident with her Chopin comment had been neatly filed away in her mind as a momentary lapse. Best forgotten that was until she heard it. At first, the sound was so faint she thought she might be imagining it, a whisper of melody floating through the air. Elena paused, tilting her head slightly. There it was again, more distinct now, piano music coming from somewhere inside the building. Curious despite herself, Elena followed the sound, her prepared remarks temporarily forgotten. The music grew clearer as she approached the grand ballroom where the gala had been held 2 nights earlier. She pushed open one of the heavy doors just enough to peek inside. The vast room was empty of people except for a single figure seated at the grand piano on the far side. Elena squinted, recognizing the gray uniform of the maintenance staff. The janitor, the same one she had noticed during the gala, sat with his back to her, his posture straight but somehow natural as his hands moved across the keyboard. Elena's breath caught in her throat as recognition dawned. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, the very piece she had mentioned in her impulsive challenge. And he was playing it beautifully, She slipped into the room without thinking, drawn by the music. The janitor hadn't noticed her entrance, too lost in his playing. Elena moved closer, step by careful step, not wanting to interrupt. The man's technique wasn't flawless. She could hear hesitations in certain passages, small adjustments where his fingers seemed to struggle with the more demanding sections, but there was something in his playing that transcended technical perfection. An emotional depth that spoke of real-life experience, of joy and loss, hope and heartbreak. Elena found herself standing just 15 feet behind him now, completely entranced. Her analytical mind registered that his left hand sometimes moved differently than it should, compensating for what appeared to be some limitation. Yet the music flowed on, telling its story, building toward the climactic section. When he reached the coda, that final explosive burst of notes that demanded everything from a pianist, Elena held her breath. His hands flew across the keys, not with the showy flourish of a performer seeking applause, but with the honest intensity of someone speaking their truth. The final notes hung in the air, resonant and pure, before fading into silence. Only then did Elena realize she had tears in her eyes. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then the janitor's shoulders tensed and he turned slowly on the bench to face her. Their eyes met, and Elena saw recognition flicker across his face. He knew exactly who she was. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-40s, with intelligent brown eyes and hands that bore the marks of both manual labor and something else, the disciplined strength of a trained musician. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but clear, with a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "I know I shouldn't be using the piano." Elena found her voice at last. "You're playing Chopin." He nodded once, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "I was just remembering." "Remembering?" Elena took another step forward, her curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. The man hesitated, then held up his left hand, showing her the long scar across his palm and the slightly crooked set of two fingers. "I used to play professionally before this. Now I just play for myself sometimes when no one is listening." His eyes held hers steadily, or at least when I think no one is listening. Elena felt oddly off balance, as if the carefully ordered world she controlled so efficiently had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "What's your name?" she asked. "Miguel Reyes." "You're very good, Mr. Reyes." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I was better once." From outside the ballroom came the sound of voices, board members arriving early, their conversation echoing in the marble hallway. Elena glanced toward the door, suddenly aware of how this scene might appear to her colleagues. Miguel stood up from the piano bench, smoothing down his uniform. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Elena said, the word escaping before she could consider it. "You heard what I said at the gala, didn't you? About marrying someone who could play that piece." Miguel's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "Yes, I heard." "I wasn't serious, of course," Elena added quickly. "I know." He closed the piano lid with gentle reverence. "I wasn't playing to claim your hand in marriage, Ms. Michaels. I was playing because sometimes music is the only way I know to feel fully alive." The simple honesty of his words struck Elena silent. Before she could formulate a response, the ballroom doors swung open, and Richard Donovan entered with 3 other board members. "Elena." "There you are," Richard called out. "We thought you'd be in the boardroom already." His eyes moved to Miguel, registering his presence with slight confusion. Miguel gave Elena a small nod and moved away, picking up a cleaning cart she hadn't noticed before. He began wiping down surfaces on the far side of the room, instantly transforming back into the invisible worker she had barely noticed 2 nights ago. "Is everything all right?" Richard asked, glancing between Elena and the retreating maintenance worker. Elena composed herself quickly. "Of course. I was just checking that the room would be available for the reception after our meeting." Richard seemed satisfied with this explanation, and they proceeded toward the boardroom, the other board members falling in behind them. As they walked, Richard leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "You know, I've been thinking about your Chopin challenge. I've arranged for piano lessons." "Never too late to learn, right?" Elena forced a smile, but her mind was still in the ballroom with the haunting melody and the man with wounded hands who could make a piano speak with such emotion. The board meeting proceeded as planned. Elena presented her quarterly report with her usual precision and confidence. She fielded questions, outlined strategies, and secured approval for her proposed expansion into new markets. On the surface, nothing had changed, but throughout the 2-hour meeting, the music lingered in her mind. And occasionally her eyes drifted to the door as if expecting to see Miguel there. When the meeting concluded, Elena made an uncharacteristic decision. Instead of joining the board members for their usual post-meeting drinks, she excused herself and went looking for Miguel. She found him in a service corridor, restocking a cleaning cart. He looked up in surprise when she approached. "Ms. Michaels, is there a problem?" Elena straightened her shoulders, suddenly feeling awkward. This wasn't a business negotiation or a media interview, situations where she always knew exactly what to say and how to say it. "No problem. I wanted to ask you something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Miguel seemed to consider whether to answer, then set down the bottle of cleaning solution in his hand. "I studied at the National Conservatory of Music in Santiago, Chile. I was a concert pianist for almost 15 years. And now you're a janitor at Metropolitan Hall," Elena said, immediately regretting how dismissive it sounded. But Miguel didn't take offense. "Now I'm many things. A father to my children, a janitor here, a morning shift worker at Rosa's Cafe, and yes, still a pianist. Even if the world doesn't know it anymore." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet dignity that made Elena feel suddenly self-conscious about her designer suit and the diamond watch on her wrist. "What happened?" she asked, nodding toward his scarred hand. "Car accident 8 years ago. Severed tendons, nerve damage." He flexed his fingers, demonstrating their limited movement. "The doctors did their best, but some things can't be fixed completely. Yet you can still play Chopin." A genuine smile warmed his face. "Not like I once could. But yes, I can still play. Music finds a way, if you let it." From down the hall came the sound of a door opening, and the evening supervisor's voice called out, "Reyes, where are you? There's a spill in the west corridor that needs cleaning up." Miguel picked up his supplies again. "Duty calls." Elena found herself oddly reluctant to end their conversation. "Mr. Reyes, Miguel, would you consider playing again?" "Publicly, I mean." Surprise registered on his face, followed by something like pain. "No, I don't think so. What you heard today was private practice, not performance quality. And besides, that part of my life is over." "Does it have to be?" The question surprised Elena as much as it seemed to surprise Miguel. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Why do you care, Ms. Michaels?" It was a fair question, and one for which Elena had no ready answer. Why did she care about this man's lost career? What was it about his music that had moved her so deeply? Before she could formulate a response, the supervisor's voice called out again, more insistently this time. "I have to go," Miguel said. "Goodbye, Ms. Michaels." Elena watched him walk away, pushing his cart ahead of him, back straight, head high. She remained standing in the empty corridor long after he had disappeared from view, trying to understand the strange feeling taking root inside her. A feeling that the world was suddenly bigger and more complex than the tidy, controllable version she had built her life around. Later that evening, as her driver took her home, Elena found herself humming the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. The story of the CEO and the janitor who played Chopin spread through Pinnacle Technologies like wildfire. By the following Monday morning, Elena couldn't walk through her office without noticing the sudden hush in conversations as she passed, or the curious glances that followed her down hallways. "I don't understand how everyone found out," Elena said, pacing her corner office while Lily scrambled to keep up with her. "Well," Lily began hesitantly, "Mr. Donovan mentioned it to the marketing team at the reception after the board meeting. Apparently he walked in when you were listening to Mr. Reyes play." Elena stopped pacing. And he thought it was interesting that the maintenance worker was playing the exact piece you had mentioned in your marriage challenge." Lily's voice grew smaller with each word. "It wasn't a challenge," Elena snapped. "It was a thoughtless remark that's being blown completely out of proportion." Lily nodded quickly. "Of course. But the story has a certain appeal. The powerful CEO who made a flippant comment about marrying a man who could play Chopin, only to discover the janitor." "That's enough," Elena interrupted. "We have actual work to do. The Singapore deal won't close itself." But as the day progressed, Elena found her normally laser-focused mind wandering repeatedly to the image of Miguel's hands moving across the piano keys, coaxing such beauty from the instrument despite his injury. She had spent the weekend researching him online, finding old concert reviews from Chilean newspapers, videos of performances from before his accident, articles about his rising career. The contrast between the poised concert pianist in a tuxedo and the quiet man in a gray uniform pushing a cleaning cart was jarring. By mid-afternoon, Elena made a decision. She picked up her phone and called the Metropolitan Hall's administration office. 3 hours later, she pulled her car into the modest parking lot of Rosa's Cafe, a small establishment in a working-class neighborhood far from her usual haunts. Through the window, she could see Miguel wiping down tables, dressed in a white shirt and black apron rather than his janitorial uniform. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour, the lunch rush over, too early for dinner. A bell jingled as Elena entered, causing Miguel to look up. Surprise registered on his face, followed quickly by wariness. "Ms. Michaels," he said, straightening. "This is unexpected." Elena suddenly felt out of place in her tailored suit and expensive heels. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I asked at Metropolitan Hall where I might find you during the day." Miguel set down his cleaning cloth. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be nice, thank you." He moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, preparing her drink. A short, round woman emerged from the kitchen, her curious eyes moving from Miguel to Elena and back again. "Miguel, who is your friend?" she asked in accented English. "This is Ms. Michaels, Rosa. She's from the hall." Rosa's eyebrows rose slightly, but she smiled warmly at Elena. "Any friend of Miguel's is welcome here. First coffee's on the house." After Rosa returned to the kitchen, Miguel brought Elena's coffee to a small table by the window. He hesitated, then sat across from her. "Why are you here, Ms. Michaels?" Elena wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Please call me Elena." Miguel nodded but remained silent, waiting for her answer. "I've been thinking about your playing," she finally said. "And I've been doing some research. You were quite acclaimed before your accident." Miguel's expression tightened. "That was another lifetime. Does your family know about your past as a pianist?" "My children know I used to play professionally. They don't know the details. How close I came to an international career, the tours that were planned." He glanced down at his left hand. It seemed cruel to burden them with what might have been. Elena took a sip of her coffee. It was surprisingly good. "I have a proposition for you." Miguel's eyes narrowed slightly. "I already told you I'm not interested in performing again." "Hear me out," Elena said, leaning forward. "Pinnacle Technologies sponsors an annual benefit concert for music education in underprivileged schools. It's happening in 6 weeks. I'd like you to play." Miguel was already shaking his head before she finished speaking. "No, I'm sorry, but no. What you heard wasn't performance quality. My left hand simply can't—" "I've seen the videos of you playing before your accident," Elena interrupted. "You were remarkable, but what I heard the other day had something those earlier performances didn't. Something real, something lived." Miguel looked away, his jaw tight. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Maybe not," Elena admitted. "But I do know that talent like yours shouldn't remain hidden. And the cause is a good one. Bringing music to children who otherwise wouldn't have access to it." A flicker of interest crossed Miguel's face at the mention of children, but he quickly suppressed it. "I appreciate the offer, but my answer is still no." Elena hadn't expected this to be easy. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "Think about it, please. The offer stands." As she rose to leave, she added, "By the way, everyone at my company seems to know about your playing. And about my unfortunate remark at the gala." Miguel winced. "I'm sorry about that. I haven't told anyone, but Mr. Donovan saw us in the ballroom." "It's not your fault," Elena said with a sigh. "But just so we're clear, I'm not actually expecting you to marry me if you perform at the benefit." For the first time, Miguel smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed his serious face. "That's a relief. I was worried about how to explain that to my children." The unexpected moment of humor caught Elena off guard, and she found herself smiling back. "Well then, glad we cleared that up." As she walked back to her car, Elena felt Miguel's eyes following her. She had meant what she said. His talent deserved to be heard. But there was something more. Something she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge even to herself. Something about the way his music had reached past all her carefully constructed defenses and touched something real inside her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, conference calls, and strategy sessions. Elena threw herself into work with even more intensity than usual, as if trying to drown out the melody that kept playing in her head. She heard nothing from Miguel and told herself it didn't matter. The benefit concert would proceed with or without him. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Lily appeared in her office doorway, looking uncertain. "There's someone here to see you." "He doesn't have an appointment." Elena glanced up from her computer. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Miguel Reyes." Elena felt her heart skip a beat, which annoyed her. She was not some lovesick teenager. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. "Send him in." Miguel entered her office, looking uncomfortable in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, clearly his best non-work clothes. His eyes took in the spacious room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the sleek, modern furniture, the awards displayed on one wall. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment," he said formally. Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, Mr. Reyes?" He sat down, his posture straight but tense. "I've been thinking about your offer, about the benefit concert, and—" Miguel took a deep breath. "I have conditions." Elena leaned back in her chair, surprised but intrigued. "I'm listening." "First, I would play only one piece, the Chopin Ballade. My hand can't handle a full program." Elena nodded. "Reasonable. What else?" "Second, I want no publicity beforehand. No mention of my name or backstory in any promotional materials. If people are going to hear me play, I want it to be about the music, not some heartwarming story about a janitor returning to the stage. That might be difficult to control, given how quickly the story spread through my company," Elena pointed out. Miguel's expression was determined. "Try. Very well. Anything else?" "Yes." Here Miguel hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "I want you to establish a scholarship for young musicians who otherwise couldn't afford training. Not just a one-time donation, but an ongoing program." Elena studied him with new respect. He wasn't asking for money for himself, but for others who shared his passion. That's a substantial commitment. "So is returning to the stage after 8 years," he countered quietly. For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. Then Elena extended her hand across the desk. "Deal." Miguel looked at her outstretched hand, then slowly reached out to shake it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from years of manual work. Yet Elena could feel the controlled strength of a pianist's hand. "There's one more thing you should know," Miguel said, releasing her hand. "I've been practicing, but I still can't play the piece perfectly. There will be flaws." "Perfection is overrated," Elena found herself saying, surprising them both. Miguel's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled at the corners. "That's not what I expected to hear from someone with your reputation." "What reputation is that?" "The Glacier," he said with a hint of a smile. "That's what they call you at the hall." Elena winced. "Ouch. Though after the past few weeks, some people are revising their opinion," Miguel added. "The Thawing Glacier is the new nickname." Elena laughed despite herself, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed in the large office. "I suppose I deserved that." As Miguel left, Elena found herself standing at her window, watching as he exited the building far below and walked toward the bus stop. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, she had made a business decision based not on profit margins or strategic advantage, but on an emotional response to beauty and talent. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely free, as if she had set down a heavy burden she hadn't known she was carrying. The Metropolitan Hall would host the benefit concert in 4 weeks. Elena had no idea what would happen when Miguel took the stage, but for once in her meticulously planned life, she was willing to embrace the uncertainty. The night of the benefit concert arrived with a surprising chill in the air. Elena stood in the wings of Metropolitan Hall, watching as the city's elite filed into their seats, programs in hand. True to her word, Miguel's name appeared nowhere in those programs. He was listed simply as special guest performer for the final piece of the evening. Elena had barely seen Miguel in the weeks leading up to the concert. He had taken a temporary leave from his janitorial duties to practice, though he continued his morning shifts at Rosa's Cafe. Occasionally, Elena had received brief text messages from him. Practice going well or left hand struggling with measure 264. Nothing personal. Nothing beyond the necessary updates she had requested as the event organizer. Yet somehow, he had remained constantly in her thoughts. Quite the turnout, Richard Donovan said, appearing at her elbow. Though I still think you should have let us promote the full story. CEO's Chopin Challenge leads to Janitor's triumphant return to concert stage. It practically writes itself. Elena gave him a cool look. That wasn't the deal, Richard shrugged. Well, either way, it's good publicity for Pinnacle. Speaking of which, have you seen the latest coverage of the scholarship program you announced? The education reporter at the Chronicle is calling you the corporate world's newest arts champion. Elena nodded absently, her attention drawn to the backstage door that had just opened. Miguel entered, wearing a simple black suit that Elena had arranged for him. His children followed, Lucia, tall and serious in a borrowed blue dress, and Diego fidgeting with the collar of his dress shirt. Rosa from the cafe came last, beaming with pride. Miguel's eyes met Elena's across the room. He gave her a small nod, his expression tense but determined. "Excuse me," Elena said to Richard, moving away before he could respond. She approached Miguel and his family, offering a warm smile to the children. "You must be Lucia and Diego. Your father has told me about you." Lucia studied Elena with intelligent, cautious eyes. "You're the CEO who challenged my papa to play Chopin." Elena winced internally. "That's not exactly how I'd put it." "It's okay," Miguel said to his daughter. "Ms. Michaels, Elena, has been very supportive." Rosa patted Miguel's arm. "We are all so proud of him. Playing in this beautiful hall again after so long." Diego looked around wide-eyed at the ornate surroundings. "Papa, are all these people here to hear you play?" Miguel knelt down to his son's level. "They're here to support music education for children who don't have the chance to learn instruments or take lessons. Like I've always taught you, music is something everyone should have access to, not just the wealthy." The boy nodded solemnly. "Like your students in the community center." Elena hadn't known Miguel taught music. Another piece of the puzzle that was this remarkable man fell into place. "The concert is about to begin," she said gently. "There's a reserved box for your family if you'd like to watch the first part of the program." As an usher led Rosa and the children away, Miguel remained behind. He flexed his left hand unconsciously, a gesture Elena had come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted with a small smile. "I haven't performed in front of an audience like this in 8 years, and even then never in a venue this prestigious." "You've played this hall before," Elena pointed out. "Just not from the stage." Miguel laughed softly. "True, though pushing a broom gives you a different perspective than sitting at the piano." Elena wanted to say something encouraging, something meaningful, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached out and briefly touched his arm. "Good luck." The first half of the program featured a string quartet, a young opera singer, and a children's chorus from one of the schools benefiting from the night's fundraising. Elena watched from her seat in the front row, applauding at the appropriate moments, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself studying the grand piano waiting at center stage, wondering how it would sound under Miguel's hands. During intermission, she slipped backstage again. Miguel sat alone in a small practice room, his eyes closed, fingers moving silently through the air as he mentally rehearsed his piece. Elena watched him quietly from the doorway, struck by the contrast between this focused artist and the unassuming janitor she had barely noticed just weeks ago. How many other people did she overlook every day? How many hidden talents and remarkable stories passed by her, invisible because she never bothered to truly see? Miguel opened his eyes, sensing her presence. "Almost time?" "About 10 minutes, Elena confirmed. "I just wanted to check on you." He stood up, rolling his shoulders to release tension. "I've been thinking about what you said, about perfection being overrated. Have I damaged my reputation as the glacier beyond repair?" Elena asked with a small smile. "Perhaps," Miguel said, "but I think I like the thawed version better." Before Elena could respond, the stage manager appeared. 5 minutes, Mr. Reyes." Soon, Elena was back in her seat as the host of the evening stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final performer tonight is a special guest who will be playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Please welcome to the stage, Miguel Reyes." A polite applause filled the hall as Miguel walked on stage. Only those nearest to Elena might have noticed how she held her breath as he approached the piano, bowed briefly to the audience, and sat down on the bench. For a long moment, Miguel sat completely still, his eyes closed, hands resting lightly on his lap. The hall grew silent, the audience's curiosity almost palpable. Then slowly he raised his hands to the keys and began to play. The opening notes floated through the air, delicate and questioning. Elena had heard him play this piece twice before, but something was different tonight. There was a vulnerability in his performance, an openness that hadn't been there during his private practice sessions. As the piece developed, building in complexity and emotion, Elena could see the exact moment Miguel fully surrendered to the music. His body relaxed even as his hands moved with increasing intensity across the keyboard. His face transformed, years of hardship momentarily lifted away. Yes, there were imperfections. In the most technically demanding passages, his left hand couldn't quite achieve the speed and precision it once had, but these small flaws only made the performance more powerful, more human. This wasn't a perfect rendition of Chopin. It was Miguel's story told through Chopin's notes. The struggle, the loss, the resilience, the beauty that remains even after dreams are broken. Elena wasn't aware she was crying until she felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, hoping no one had noticed. The CEO of Pinnacle Technologies did not cry at benefit concerts, except apparently she did. When Miguel reached the final triumphant passage, his hands dancing across the keys in a display of both technical skill and raw emotion, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The final notes resonated through the space, hanging in the air for one perfect moment before fading into silence. The stillness lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the audience erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, their enthusiasm building as Miguel stood and offered a modest bow. Elena was on her feet with everyone else, clapping until her hands hurt. She watched as Miguel's eyes found his children in their box, saw his face light up at their excitement. Lucia was crying openly while Diego jumped up and down, pumping his fist in the air. When Miguel took his second bow, his gaze found Elena in the front row. Their eyes locked, and somehow, amid hundreds of people, it felt like a private moment between just the two of them. He gave her a small nod, a thank you perhaps, or something more. 3 encores later, as the audience finally began to disperse into the night, Elena made her way backstage once more. The area was crowded now, board members, donors, musicians all mingling together. Miguel stood surrounded by well-wishers, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. His children stayed close to his side while Rosa beamed proudly nearby. Elena held back, watching as a distinguished older gentleman handed Miguel a business card. She recognized him as the director of the city's music conservatory. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Elena approached as Miguel was hugging his children. "You were amazing, Papa," Diego exclaimed. Everyone loved it. "Thank you, mijo," Miguel said, ruffling his son's hair. He looked up as Elena approached. "And thank you, Elena, for everything." "I did very little," she said honestly. "The talent was always there." "Sometimes talent isn't enough," Miguel replied. "Sometimes you need someone to remind you it's worth sharing." Lucia, who had been studying Elena with that same thoughtful gaze, suddenly asked, "So, are you going to marry my papa now?" "Lucia!" Miguel exclaimed, mortified. Elena couldn't help but laugh. "Your papa played beautifully, but I think we both agreed that was just a silly remark, not a real promise." "Oh," Lucia said, sounding disappointed. "That's too bad. He hasn't dated anyone since my mother died, and he smiles more when he talks about you." "And on that note," Miguel said hurriedly, his face flushed, "I think it's time to get you two home. It's way past bedtime." Rosa took the hint and ushered the children toward the exit, throwing a knowing smile over her shoulder. When they were alone, an awkward silence fell between Elena and Miguel. "I meant what I said," Elena finally offered. "You were amazing tonight." "There were mistakes," Miguel said, flexing his left hand unconsciously. "Yes," Elena agreed. "And it was perfect because of them, not despite them." Miguel looked at her thoughtfully. "You really have changed since that night at the gala. Perhaps I needed someone to remind me that there's more to life than perfection and control." Elena took a deep breath. "The conservatory director who spoke to you, he offered you a teaching position, didn't he?" Miguel nodded, still looking somewhat dazed. "Full-time with benefits. and he wants me to consider performing occasionally. Small recitals, nothing too demanding. You'll take it, I hope. I think I will, Miguel said. It would mean leaving Metropolitan Hall, though. I think the hall can survive without you, Elena said. Though I'm not sure She stopped herself, surprised by what she had almost revealed. Miguel stepped closer. You're not sure you what? Elena Michaels, who had faced down hostile corporate takeovers and given speeches to thousands without a flutter of nerves, found herself struggling for words. I'm not sure I'm ready to stop hearing you play, she finally said. The smile that spread across Miguel's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Well, as it happens, I've been working on some other pieces. Perhaps if you're not busy sometime, you might like to hear them. Maybe over dinner? It wasn't at all how Elena had imagined her life unfolding. 6 weeks ago, she wouldn't have looked twice at the quiet janitor cleaning the floors of Metropolitan Hall. Now, she couldn't imagine not seeing where this unexpected journey might lead. I think I'd like that very much, she said. As they walked together toward the exit, Elena realized something important. Her flippant challenge about marrying a man who could play Chopin had been born of emptiness and frustration. But what had grown from that thoughtless moment was something far more valuable than she could have imagined. A reminder that beauty can emerge from imperfection, that second chances sometimes come in unexpected forms, and that the most remarkable talents often exist where we least expect to find them.